On the working man. The contempt for the existing social order is most conspicuous in its extreme form, that of offences against the law. If the influences demoralizing to the working man act more powerfully, more concentratedly than usual, he becomes an offender as certainly as water abandons the fluid for the vaporous state at 80 degrees, Réaumur. Under the brutal and brutalizing treatment of the bourgeoisie, the working man becomes precisely as much a thing without volition as water, and is subject to the laws of nature with precisely the same necessity. At a certain point all freedom ceases. Hence with the extension of the proletariat, crime has increased in England, and the British nation has become the most criminal in the world. From the annual criminal tables of the Home Secretary, it is evident that the increase of crime in England has proceeded with incomprehensible rapidity. The numbers of arrests for criminal offences reached in the years 1805, 4,605. 1810, 5,146. 1815, 7,898. 1820, 13,710. 1825, 14,437. 1,830, 18, 107. 1835, 20,731. 1840, 27,187. 1841, 27,760. 1842, 31,309 in England and Wales alone. That is to say, they increased sevenfold in 37 years. Of these arrests, in 1842, 4,497 were made in Lancashire alone, or more than 14% of the whole, and 4,094 in Middlesex, including London, or more than 13%. So that two districts which include great cities with large proletarian populations, produced one-fourth of the total amount of crime, though their population is far from forming one-fourth of the whole. Moreover, the criminal tables prove directly that nearly all crime arises within the proletariat, for, in 1842, taking the average, out of 100 criminals, 32.35 could neither read nor write. 58.32 read and wrote imperfectly. 6.77 could read and write well. 0.22 had enjoyed a higher education, while the degree of education of 2.34 could not be ascertained. In Scotland, crime has increased yet more rapidly. There were but 89 arrests for criminal offences in 1819, and as early as 1837 the number had risen to 3,176, and in 1842 to 4,189. In Lanarkshire, where Sheriff Allison himself made out the official report, population has doubled once in 30 years, and crime once in 5.5, or 6 times more rapidly than the population. The offences, as in all civilized countries, are, in the great majority of cases, against property, and have, therefore, arisen from want in some form, for what a man has, he does not steal. The proportion of offences against property to the population, which in the Netherlands, is as 1,740, and in France, as 1,1804, was in England, when Gaskell wrote, as 1,799. The proportion of offences against persons to the population is, in the Netherlands, 128,904, in France, 117,573, in England, 123,395, that of crimes in general to the population in the agricultural districts as 1,1043, in the manufacturing districts as 1,840, 131 in the whole of England today the proportion is 1,660. 131 though it is scarcely 10 years since Gaskell's book appeared. These facts are certainly more than sufficient to bring anyone, even a bourgeois, to pause and reflect upon the consequences of such a state of things. If demoralization and crime multiply 20 years longer in this proportion, and if English manufacture in these 20 years should be less prosperous than heretofore, the progressive multiplication of crime can only continue the more rapidly. What will the result be? Society is already in a state of visible dissolution. It is impossible to pick up a newspaper without seeing the most striking evidence of the giving way of all social ties. I look at random into a heap of English journals lying before me. There is the Manchester Guardian for October 30, 1844, which reports for 3 days. It no longer takes the trouble to give exact details as to Manchester, and merely relates the most interesting cases, that the workers in a mill have struck for higher wages without giving notice, and been condemned by a justice of the peace to resume work, that in Salford a couple of boys had been caught stealing, and a bankrupt tradesman tried to cheat his creditors. From the neighbouring towns the reports are more detailed. In Ashton, 2 thefts, 1 burglary, 1 suicide; in Bury, 1 theft; in Bolton, 2 thefts, 1 revenue fraud; in Lee, 1 theft; in Oldham, 1 strike for wages, 1 theft; 1 fight between Irish women, 1 non-union hatter assaulted by union men, 1 mother beaten by her son, 1 attack upon the police, 1 robbery of a church; in Stockport, discontent of working men with wages, 1 theft, 1 fraud, 1 fight, 1 wife beaten by her husband; in Warrington, 1 theft, 1 fight; in Wigan, 1 theft, and 1 robbery of a church. The reports of the London papers are much worse. Frauds, thefts, assaults, family quarrels crowd one another. A Times of September 12, 1844, falls into my hand, which gives a report of a single day, including a theft, an attack upon the police, a sentence upon a father requiring him to support his illegitimate son, the abandonment of a child by its parents, and the poisoning of a man by his wife. Similar reports are to be found in all the English papers. In this country, social war is under full headway. Everyone stands for himself, and fights for himself against all comers, and whether or not he shall injure all the others who are his declared foes, depends upon a cynical calculation as to what is most advantageous for himself. It no longer occurs to anyone to come to a peaceful understanding with his fellow man. All differences are settled by threats, violence, or in a law court. In short, everyone sees in his neighbor an enemy to be got out of the way, or, at best, a tool to be used for his own advantage. And this war grows from year to year, as the criminal tables show, more violent, passionate, irreconcilable. The enemies are dividing gradually into 2 great camps, the bourgeoisie on the one hand, the workers on the other. This war of each against all, of the bourgeoisie against the proletariat, need cause us no surprise, for it is only the logical sequel of the principle involved in free competition. But it may very well surprise us that the bourgeoisie remains so quiet and composed in the face of the rapidly gathering storm clouds, that it can read all these things daily in the papers without, we will not say indignation at such a social condition, but fear of its consequences, of a universal outburst of that which manifests itself symptomatically from day to day in the form of crime. But then it is the bourgeoisie, and from its standpoint, cannot even see the facts, much less perceive their consequences. One thing only is astounding, that class prejudice and preconceived opinions can hold a whole class of human beings in such perfect, I might almost say, such mad blindness. Meanwhile, the development of the nation goes its way, whether the bourgeoisie has eyes for it or not, and will surprise the property-holding class one day with things not dreamed of in its philosophy. Single branches of industry, factory hands. In dealing now with the more important branches of the English manufacturing proletariat, we shall begin, according to the principle already laid down, with the factory workers, i.e., those who are comprised under the Factory Act. This law regulates the length of the working day in mills in which wool, silk, cotton, and flax are spun, or woven by means of water or steam power, and embraces, therefore, the more important branches of English manufacture. The class employed by them is the most intelligent and energetic of all the English workers, and, therefore, the most restless and most hated by the bourgeoisie. It stands as a whole, and the cotton workers preeminently stand at the head of the labour movement, as their masters the manufacturers, especially those of Lancashire, take the lead of the bourgeois agitation. We have already seen in the introduction, how the population employed in working up the textile materials were first torn from their former way of life. It is, therefore, not surprising that the progress of mechanical invention in later years also affected precisely these workers most deeply and permanently. The history of cotton manufacture is related by your 134a Baines, 134b and others is the story of improvements in every direction, most of which have become domesticated in the other branches of industry as well. Hand work is superseded by machine work almost universally, nearly all manipulations are conducted by the aid of steam or water, and every year is bringing further improvements. In a well-ordered state of society, such improvements could only be a source of rejoicing. In a war of all against all, individuals seize the benefit for themselves, and so deprive the majority of the means of subsistence.